Welcome to the Devil's Digest Postgame Analysis Show. I'm Jacob Brooks alongside publisher Hode Rabino. And Hode, this was a resounding win for the Sun Devils, defeating Colorado at home 81-61. They were dominant on both ends.
Yeah, they really were, Jacob. And after that very disappointing loss to BYU on the road to open up Big 12 play, I think that ASU really needed a bounce back win in the worst way. In Colorado, at least in my opinion, was exactly what the doctor had ordered. Not that Colorado really had a bad season until now, but kind of a weird season, believe it or not. Tonight was the first road game for Colorado. They did have an impressive non-conference win on neutral court against UConn, but their other losses, much like ASU before the BYU game, were to ranked teams. But ASU, I think, really maybe could have not asked for a more quote-unquote comfortable opponent in Colorado, when you really tried to bounce back from such a tough loss against BYU. Not having Jason Sanan, ASU's leading scorer in the lineup, was something that Bobby Hurley was obviously very concerned about. He said that Sean Phillips actually wasn't too far from also missing this game. So now a very tight 7-man rotation could have been even a 6-man rotation. But give credit for ASU. With that 7-man rotation, they played really, really well. I know maybe the opponent was definitely maybe even more comfortable than probably you thought it would be. But nonetheless, it was definitely a great performance by Arizona State tonight. And again, a game they absolutely needed to put in the W column.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a must-win situation for ASU to get their first win of the Big 12 conference play era in their first season in the conference. Hode, ASU was on the road, didn't really have very many home game opportunities in December. They came home today, took care of business. What aspects of the game were you most impressed with?
Yeah, it's funny you mention that, Jacob, because after the game, both Bashir Jihad and BJ Freeman talked about that they kind of missed that home cooking, because really the last home game for the Sun Devils was the first week in December against San Diego. It was just really one of those weird schedules where they did play a lot of neutral site games. It did work, obviously, in their favor, because I think that ASU had a very strong non-conference slate going into Big 12 play. Again, that game against BYU, I'm not saying brought everybody down to earth, but definitely was in sharp contrast from what we saw from ASU up until then. But this really was a great performance. You just look at the stats over here, and ASU shooting 51.9% from the field, 13 from 28, 46.4% from three-point range. So when you put up numbers like that on offense, you're really not going to lose too many games. ASU also really had their defense being their best offense work in their favor. They had 19 fast break points and absolutely suffocated Colorado, who was limited to 34.8% shooting from the field, 12.5% from beyond the arc. Their leading scorer, Jillian Hammond, was scoreless tonight, and I don't know when's the last time prior to tonight that Arizona State was able to hold the opponent's score not even below the average, but just for one big fat donut on the score sheet. That definitely was impressive. I talked about BJ Freeman earlier. He's one of the players I think that stepped up the most with Jason Sanan missing the game. BJ Freeman was averaging 13 points, just over 13 points coming into tonight, scored 19. It probably could have scored a little more if he was not ejected for a very, very questionable call where he was just really trying to fight through a screen and hit somebody in a very non-comfortable place on their body. And the refs, I think, were just a little too harsh with BJ Freeman. But nonetheless, he was able to do his damage on the scoring sheet, scoring 12 points in the second half up until that ejection. So yeah, obviously he was a huge part. Bashir Jihad had 17 points and he scored. Jaden Quayton in 5 of the last 6 games being in double digits again tonight with 11 points, and also recording his 4th double-double of the season with 11 points and 10 rebounds. So good to see Jaden Quayton really playing well. With the absence of Sanan, we really wondered, okay, who's really going to step up from the bench, because obviously Sanan has really been, I think, maybe the leader for the 6-man award in the Big 12 conference, the way he's been playing. So now you have Sean Phillips with eight points off the bench, Amir Ali with 10 points off the bench. So really, I just liked what I saw as far as the collective effort from ASU on offense. And on defense, it maybe wasn't a consistent effort all the time. Colorado had 13 offensive rebounds. That's going to be a little eyesore on the stat sheet. There were some defensive lapses here and there, and I don't think ASU closed the first half as Bobby Hurley and the staff would want them to close it. But to their credit, they really came out like shot out of a cannon at the beginning of the second half. B.J. Freeman obviously leading the charge over there, had a personal, I think, a 7-0 run to start that. So I know, shifting the football, Kenny Dillingham always talks about the middle eight. How do you do in the last 4 minutes of the first half and the first 4 minutes of the second half? And I think that ASU definitely had the sharp contrast over there, but more importantly, in the second half, the way they started really negated the somewhat poor play they had to finish the first half. So I think ASU really has a lot to be proud of, because in terms of a well-rounded game against a quality opponent, I think this is probably the best outing for the Sun Devils so far this year.
And Hode, you talk about a performance to be proud of. This is definitely a performance to be proud of, but like you also mentioned, this was an easier Colorado opponent than a lot of the teams that ASU has already faced this season and will continue to face this season. So the Sun Devils can't afford to get complacent. They take on Kansas upcoming, they take on Baylor upcoming. What is going to be necessary for ASU to not get complacent and compete against these top conference opponents?
Yeah, one thing for sure, after ASU recorded those back-to-back wins against Kansas, in Lawrence as well as here in Tempe, that Kansas was foaming at the mouth when they heard that ASU would be joining the Big 12 conference, really for basketball purposes more than football purposes. They're definitely going into the Lions' Den on Wednesday night at Lawrence, Kansas. I think that if they're not going to have Sanin for that game, that might be a really tough hurdle to overcome. But I think that more importantly, ASU is really coming in with confidence into that game. I can't imagine how ASU would have played if their first game after that horrible loss to BYU would be that road game against Kansas. So hopefully that buffer of a very impressive win over Colorado can serve them well. And then a week from today, on Saturday here at Desert Financial Arena, they're going to host Baylor, who may just drop out of the top 25 after the results of this weekend. But nonetheless, when you talk about the powerhouses of the conference, Baylor is right up there with Kansas, with Iowa State, with Houston. So in the Big 12, you really don't have a whole lot of nights off. And I think, to ASU's credit, they took care of business against one of the more quote-unquote comfortable opponents in the conference. But next week, they're really going to have to play much better. And if they have a lapse like they had, let's say, to end the first half like they did tonight against Colorado, that can cost you in spades when you play at Kansas or when you play at Baylor. I also think offensive rebounding, again, it's one thing giving up 13 offensive rebounds to a team like Colorado, but if that is going to show up in the stat sheet against Kansas or Baylor, that can mean a whole different story. So I think that ASU did show the resilience in playing much better and maybe really restoring a lot of that confidence. But they're really going to have to elevate their game against two tough opponents in Big 12 play. But guys, get used to it. This is the best conference in America when it comes to college basketball. I think the SEC might have somewhat of an argument, but nonetheless, this is just night and day from what ASU is used to in the Pac-12. And BYU was that rude welcome, I guess, to the Big 12 conference. ASU was able to shake that off. But against Kansas and Baylor, it's definitely going to be a whole different story, and ASU is really going to have to elevate their game from what it's been in recent outings.
Thank you, as always, for the analysis, Hode. We hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Devil's Digest Postgame Analysis Show. For all Sun Devil basketball news and coverage, make sure to check out DevilsDigest.com or follow us on Twitter at Devil's Digest, and we hope you all have a good night.